You're listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Good. I see you're recording from a hotel room today.
I am, courtesy. This episode not sponsored by anyone in particular, but I am in a Marriott Courtyard right now.
Well, we know what that experience is like. If you're a business traveler, I think you've been to courtyards all over the United States or potentially all over the world. Everyone I've been to is pretty much the same.
I think it's the consistency that I appreciate the most about it. You book a Marriott Courtyard, you know what you're going to get.
That's right. Yeah, no, and that there's something to be said for that. That's, I think, part of the reason why McDonald's is so popular, right? Is you go to McDonald's everywhere, and they're pretty close to the same experience. But beyond that, I had a funny thought. Do you remember Jack Handy on?
Of course.
Yeah, Jack Handy from
Saturday Night Live. Deep Thoughts.
Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy. So I was thinking about verified identities. And so the deep thought would go, not everybody loves verified identities. For example, kids with fake IDs do not want those identities verified.
That's pretty accurate, I would say. Nerdy, but accurate.
Well, that was part of the Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy. That was what it was all about.
I can't imagine what he would write at this point. I should probably say what he would write. I don't even know if he's still alive or not, but classic from the 90s. I guess I just assumed that maybe he has moved on, but I don't know for sure.
No,
if only we had a researcher and a producer that we could yell into our ear to look that up.
or like an intern where we say, why don't you go look up who wrote the Jack Handy episodes on or skits, and are they still alive? We need an intern, Jeff.
We do. It pays negative money. You actually have to pay us, and it's thankless work. So if that's not an attractive job offer, I don't know what is.
Yeah, exactly. So, hey, we've got a couple of things coming up. Do you want to kind of run down the list, or do you want me to?
I'll kick us off because you did it last time. We've got a few different things going on. So while you've got more going on than I do at this point, you've got next week. Actually, this week, by the time people listen to this, so it'll be September 19th when this episode goes live. But later on the week, there will be a webinar that Jim is representing us on with One Cosmos. MFA tried to fix passwords, but how do we fix MFA? Super sexy title. I'm sure be very interesting. So if you want to support the show, go support Jim, register for the webinar. I'll have a link in our show notes that people can check out. But yeah, looking forward to. I'll be catching that on the replay because I'll be on a flight back from Las Vegas, theoretically, at that point. We've also got the Authenticate 2022 conference coming up, put on by our friends over at FIDO. That is October 17th and 19th. We're going to be out there, both Jim and I, and looking to do some podcasting. So Jim has already started trying to fill up our schedule with the shows to record. So we'll be looking to do some things there. We're also going to be at Octane in November in San Francisco. I think it's November 8th to the 10th. It's kind of like a partner/customer conference, but the idea there is, again, we'll have hopefully conversations with folks in and around sort of the authentication space and folks at Octane and so forth. Did I cover everything?
I think there's one other one, so we don't know the date for it yet, but friend of the show and friend of ours, Tom Lennon, from SailPoint, has asked us to present to the Carolinas Identity Roundtable. So that's yet to be scheduled, but it should happen here in 2022. And just shout out to Tom for giving us the opportunity. I think it's going to be a fun time.
Yeah, that'll be cool. I don't know what we're going to talk about or how it's going to work, but we're excited to figure it out. And so
maybe something related to identity and access management, I'm guessing.
I hope so. That's the only thing. Well, even that you could barely say we're qualified to speak about, but we do it anyway.
We do it anyway.
Do you want to get to our topic for today?
Sure. Yeah. And so Jack Handy would be proud of us. We're going to talk about identity proofing, verified identities, and verifiable credentials. And we had a good little conversation about making sure we got that terminology right. With us, we have Nishant Kaushik. CTO with Uniken, former colleague of ours back in our Identropy days. And Nishant was with us last on episode number 73, which was December of 2020, right in the peak of the pandemic. So I guess he was not out running around the world at that point, like the rest of us. He was at home, and
Maybe we don't know.
yeah, I guess we can introduce him and ask him what he's been up to since the last time he was on the show. Hey, Nishant.
Hey everyone. Hi guys. I have definitely not been running around anywhere, even now. Like, I think, the only work related or identity related trip I took was when I went to Ideniverse earlier this year. Other than that, I've been pretty much homebound in terms of working from home and focusing on the work we're doing at Uniken.
Yeah, and did that conference wind up becoming like a super spreader? I think a few people left the conference and wound up catching COVID shortly after. But I mean, COVID's pretty much everywhere now, so I don't know if you can necessarily pinpoint the fact that you were at the conference.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely happened, but it pretty much happened at every conference that took place. So, it's just the nature of going back to a world that used to exist before, and we're trying to live that same life, but, that world still hasn't come back yet. So,
Yeah, RSA was the same way earlier in the year. Had I dodged it, but I know a lot of people got sick, and I think I heard to make the Ideniverse. Jim and I couldn't make Ideniverse. It was just terrible timing for for both of us for different reasons. We were at Gartner a few weeks ago, and knock on wood, so far so good for me. And I haven't heard of any sort of outbreaks. So maybe the same people who were who were maybe already had the antibodies through the roof or something by the time they got to Gartner through the year. So maybe that was strategy on Gartner's part. Let everyone else get sick, build
Yeah.
up the immunity, and then have their conference after that.
So, Nishant, we're going to talk about identity proofing today, and what we thought would be kind of um, a good way to start would be to start with the basics of what is identity proofing. And one thing I wanted to throw out there is like I kind of think of the process the way it used to be, which was showing up in person with a passport or and I, like a driver's license or a walking license, as we used to call them. And I was kind of thinking of a client that I worked with, probably 8 years ago. That was a university, a large university. In order to get your student ID, you had to show up on campus, or if there was a remote campus, you were full time remote, you had to go to some kind of licensing station to go and actually go through this verification. That was, in my mind, what identity proofing was. How do you define identity proofing?
well, conceptually, it's pretty much what you laid out, right? The idea there being that as a business, as a service, you're trying to verify the identity, the real world identity of a person, whatever real world identity in that context means, because it's very context sensitive, context dependent. But the idea being that you just want to make sure that when somebody's coming in and saying, "Hey, I'm Jim, and at I worked at Identropy." Actually, let me take a different example. I'm Jim, and I used to work at Identropy. So and that's something that you care about. Well, how do I verify that as a business before I allow you to proceed, and how can I trust that? So as you pointed out, we're used to these proofing processes being real world, right? In terms of brick and mortar, as we call it in my world, where we're dealing very much with this in the consumer identity space. We're dealing with it in the context of how do people open bank accounts, or people register for retail accounts, or and get access to airline accounts or healthcare or whatever. Everybody cares about the identity of the person on the other side, and that want to figure out to their required level of assurance, and that's the key part. Is this that real person? And you have to figure out how you're going to do that. And the old way of doing it, which was show up in person and show a document to a human being, doesn't work anymore. And that's what we're trying to get past. And so all the in the identity proofing space, that's literally what's being focused on right now is how do I digitize the process such that I can take the human being, for the most part, out of the equation and allow it to be fully self-service, fully remote, but with the required level of assurance.
Yeah, so we talk about, I think we just laid it out there pretty well, was the verified identity. So in other words, you've gone through the proofing process. Now your identity has been verified. We also hear about the right way to say it, I think, is verifiable credentials. The wrong way to say it, or what we commonly hear as shorthand, is verified credentials. Yeah, maybe. Do you experience that as well? Hearing people say verified credentials?
Yes, because I think the area of verifiable credentials is still pretty new and unknown to folks outside of the identity community, people who are dealing with this on a day in, day out basis. If it's really important for a lot of us who work in identity to really make sure that we acknowledge the bubble we live in. We think of these things and we know what they are, and we have huge, humongous debates about them. When you go out and talk to actual practitioners and business people, they don't really know what it is. They're thinking of their problem set, right? So, I like to, in my Twitter bio, I put I'm solver of problems, right? So the point from my perspective has always been, what is the use case? What are you trying to solve? And what businesses care about is the verified identity part, which is I need to know you are who you say you are to the level that I require to have trust in that. And that changes. That's different for different organizations, because if I'm a shopping site, a verified identity is simply, you're somebody who has an email address that I was able to send a link to and verify that you had possession of that email address, and that's sufficient for me to verify that you are somebody who wants to be a customer of me. I don't care whether you use Joe Schmo as your name. It'll matter later when I get into payments, but for now, if you're just doing stuff on site, I don't care. But if you're a bank, then a verified identity means something very, very different, because you're looking at legal identity, and do I have enough information to know that this is a real person? Do I have enough information to satisfy the know your customer regulations that I have to adhere to? Do I have enough information to be able to identify whether you tried to previously open an account with a different name, and you're somehow trying to create duplicate account fraud and things like that? So verified identity from a business perspective is trying to solve their problem with their very specific point of view, their very specific lens that they're looking at through.
Yeah, and the process that I've experienced in terms of going through a identity proofing process is very device specific. So, I'm thinking of a specific example where I went through a self-service process to verify my identity, and it used like basically a video selfie, having me turn my head and things like that, and compared it to my driver's license, which I provided copies of in terms of a picture. So I'm wondering, is that typical workflow? And are different solutions doing it differently? And how device specific it is? Is it because I tend to have higher end devices than the average person? So where does the average person fall?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very tricky topic, right? Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is build an approximation for what that real world process, that brick and mortar process that we talked about earlier. You're trying to build a digital equivalent for that, and that's because people are working from a frame of reference, and in many cases, they're actually constrained by the fact that there are regulatory requirements that were designed for brick and mortar times that have not been updated for digital times, and there are sometimes no better solutions that you have available. The best proof of who you are from a legal entity perspective is your physical document, your driver's license, your passport, etc. And there are no widespread digital equivalents. So people are making do with what they have, and that's forcing them down a path where, as you said, the process you described, which is take a selfie, take a picture of your document, and Oh wait, if you have a passport that has a chip in it, that's great, we'll do an NFC read, and we trust that even more because now there's some cryptographic assurance around it and stuff like that. And that is very much state of the art, simply because alternatives are still being developed and it's still fairly new, and they're not widespread enough, and they have enough sort of friction in the process to have an adopter problem right now, right? So it's changing. I think this is a space that's very much changing. There are organizations like Better Identity Coalition, et cetera, that are working on the regulatory side to try and introduce things that could make some of the stuff easier. But yeah, it's still pretty much, what do we have available to us that we can make do with? And what's pretty much ubiquitous right now is essentially physical documents and digital phones with cameras. That's basically the starting set you're working with.
Yeah, and I think that part of what I've heard referred to as liveness detection is part of that process, right? We want to make sure that we're not just holding up a picture of ourselves to the camera, and then I guess even there's that next level of they call it like deep fakes, where it's like I can create a video that maybe does the things that you're asking for, so it's trying to defeat that ahead of time. We're certainly not at the point of having droids or I've been watching this Captain Picard sequel to the whole Star Trek: The Next Generation, and they call Data and the folks like Data, the bots like Data, they call them synths. So we're not at that point yet, but yeah, they actually brought up something in that show that got me thinking about these liveness checks, which was that the synths, they could create absolute twins. So there's no difference between synth A and synth B, but that twins, human twins, actually are different, even if they're identical twins. And if you've known identical twins and you really get to know them, eventually they almost don't even look the same to you anymore, right? They look like two very different people, but people seeing them for the first time think, oh my gosh, here's two people that look the same. I'm wondering, can liveness detection actually detect the difference between twins?
So it's important to understand the distinction between the technical components in the process that we're discussing here, right? So liveness detection in of itself isn't, quote unquote, an identity piece. What it is, it's a security piece. What liveness detection is trying to do is ensure that the person who's presenting the document is the real person associated with that document. So at the end of the day, when you're doing an identity presentation as part of a proving process, what you're doing is you're providing a document and you're saying, here's my document that gives you all the data that you can verify whatever process you have for verifying that. And in that document, there is a picture of me, essentially, right? Like, and you're then going to say, and by the way, here's a selfie of me, and make sure that it's the two people, because you want to what you're basically trying to do there is essentially validate that the person presenting the document is the person on the document, right? So that's what you're trying to do. But in order to ensure the integrity of that, you have to make sure that the person who's taking the selfie is the real person and is not, as you said, a fake because they held up a photograph, they put on a mask, they played a video or something like that. So what liveness detection is trying to do is trying to determine that this selfie that was taken is taken of a real person, where anything that would be used to fake that can be caught. So it's a security control around around the selfie you're taking that you're then doing the match on. And that, liveness detection is the core. I've said this a bunch of times in various talks I've given. Because people talk about, oh, my biometric, if my biometric is stolen, it's like my password got stolen and things like that. And it's not, right? The power of biometric as an authentication factor specifically, but in all of these cases where we were using it in this context in the proofing factor, doesn't lie in its secrecy, because biometrics for the most part are not secret. The proof lies in actually the liveness detection of it. That's the real thing that makes sure that you have assurance around the integrity of the process that you're taking the user through. So that's why it's a really critical component that you really need to pay attention to.
So it's not the liveness detection that would tell you the difference between identical twins. It's something else about that proofing process. Is that an issue within the industry that we're struggling with identical twins?
It doesn't come up a lot, so I would say it's not really. I mean, it's a nice, interesting example that always gets used when having a conversation about how good is this process. But in reality, identical twins performing fraud isn't really an attack vector that any business is worried about, right? It's not really high. The few cases where it might be high, like for example, if you're trying to commit some kind of, you know, um, account takeover fraud in the context of, I want to take over your bank account, and siblings have fallen out. When you have a high risk transaction like that, you don't rely on just that. Then at that point, you bring in additional things to validate it, right? So you will do additional checks in addition to this. You always risk adjust what you're doing. So from that perspective, identical twins fraud, or attack vector, is an interesting theoretical concept, but in practicality, nobody really ever has to deal with it. What are bigger issues and bigger challenges right now that we see across the board is account takeover fraud, where because you have identity documents themselves that are easy to spoof and fake, I can present myself as a fictitious person. So it's more akin to the synthetic identity problem, or me stealing somebody's identity, not because I looked like them, but because I took their document and put my likeness on the document. So it's Jim's document, but it's my picture on it. So how do you catch that? So verifying the document data, verifying the proof of the identity that you're actually using, that's really where the real challenges are, because quite frankly, for an industry where we are so obsessed and work on standards, and the XKCD article, there's 14 standards and it's not working, so let's figure out how to combine it together, and now we have 15, right? In identity proofing, and the document space is wide open. Like, there is no real cohesive standards. So when you're trying to do this, you have to deal with each place, each jurisdiction, each geographic region completely different. So when in our product, where we're building this identity platform which does the whole end-to-end security around the identity, right? From proofing, onboarding, authentication, strong authentication, account recovery, all of that. We're trying to put it all together into one cohesive, seamless flow. That's what our platform does. And when we're dealing with onboarding and this kind of identity proofing, we're dealing with, you've got countries where they have fully digitized documents. Like if you go to Singapore and you have SingPass, you have, identity wallets issued by the government that can give you verifiable credentials in some sense, and so on. And you have the US, where we have passports that have chips in it, but we have, state driver's licenses where every state has a completely different format and structure. And then you have, we're dealing a lot in areas like Africa and South America, where you have the gamut. You have really sophisticated chip-based and documents, but you also have, in the same area, same jurisdiction, same population, people whose only identification is a piece of paper, like literally a piece of A4 paper that has been folded up because it's got stuff written on it in hand and stuff. And you're, as a business, trying to cover the entire population, which means you have to deal with this in this vast range. That's really the challenge. And I think that's where things like verifiable credentials, etc., really are the answer that people are looking for. Whether we get there is a whole different issue, because there's, like I said, other challenges in the place. But if you get to the point where you have that, that can really solve a lot of these problems. Because right now people are dealing with just goofy stuff, right? This is not something we should be dealing with, but we unfortunately have to deal with because we're living in the real world.
Right. Yeah, I never really even thought of that fraud use case where you just change the picture on the driver's license and then take a picture of that. Now I'm comparing my live self to a fake version of the license. If you're able to take that license and somehow verify that it hasn't been modified. So, give me an example on a state level, the 50 states, do they have some API that you go and hit and you can download something that is like a low res version of the license that you can somehow do a comparison to make sure that it's the same license? I mean, how How do you
would
make
be
that
nice.
work?
Would it? That would be nice, right? But no. And again, it's not the challenge that we have is it sounds like a nice idea until you start getting into the intricacies of just look at the way you described it. Oh, is there an API where I can download? You know, I can connect to that API and I can download Jim's license and Jim's picture. Wait, what about privacy? What about Jim's privacy? Who has access to that API? What are they doing with that data? So there's all these concerns. I don't want to say ancillary concerns, but they're enveloping concerns that you have to account for in this kind of a thing, where you have to worry about privacy, you have to worry about who has access to the data, what are they using it for, who's authorized to use it. Should the bartender have the ability to pick up a phone and look you up and get just take a picture of you, take a selfie of you at the bar as you're ordering the drink, and get immediately a download from the DMV saying, yeah, this is Jim and this is his date of birth or whatever. You don't want that, right? Because that has huge potential ramifications. But having those kind of identity services is actually pretty important when designed correctly and you do it correctly, because like I said, that is what will help us get past the current logjam we find ourselves in, where one of the challenges you often find is, as it kind of what you pointed out, right? What is the technology that is available? Well, the technology default now has become smartphone based. So what you're immediately excluding from that realm is people who don't have access to smartphones, who are under the tech poverty line, people who don't have valid identity documents, which is not as easy to have as you would think. Like, people lose identity documents all the time. This is particularly problematic for folks who are displaced, whether it's immigrants or local people who are displaced, who they've lost everything and they don't have anything anymore, but they need that identity so they have to prove their identity so they can go get welfare benefits. How do you solve that problem? These are really tricky, really complicated challenges. Trying to do all of that and talk about all of that, we could be talking for hours. I'm not going to get into that, but you kind of get a sense of what the scope and the scale of this challenge is as you go there. For example, one of the things we're working with one of our partners, we're dealing with a banking product that is targeted for financial inclusion. So it's a banking platform that is used for providing services to communities that have traditionally been unbanked. And so they end up having very, very unique challenges that we kind of have to figure out, that forced us to really rethink some of the ways in which we do stuff from an identity proofing perspective.
I feel like everything you've been talking about these are hard problems to solve. Does the industry draw a line at some point to say, here are the things that we can solve, and these are the variables that we can count on, versus trying to design a system that works for literally every single person in every single country in every single region, blah, 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 right? Even planet, right?
Yeah. No.
How does that work? Like, is there a line that basically says, okay, well, you need to be, this tall to ride, basically, for the identity space?
Absolutely. And I think people draw the line all the time. The challenge I think right now we're facing in the industry, which was a key part of the keynote I gave at Identiverse, is we've all been drawing that line kind of arbitrarily. And there are no guidelines. There's no, overarching ethical sort of body or organization or anybody that is saying, well, no, wait, that line is drawn way too high. Or on a technical side, wait, that line is drawn way too low, and you're just never going to get there. So now you're just spending a bunch of money and time and effort trying to build something that will never reach its objective goal. I mean, you guys have been doing IAM projects forever, right? You know what it's like, right? You define scope, but you have to figure out a way to make the scope practical and actually deliverable, because scope creep happens all the time. And the challenge with this is that when you draw the line too high, then you have exclusion problems, and that's obviously not a good thing, especially with what the role we play, right? If we say, yeah, you need the latest iPhone or the latest Android, great, technically it works great, but all of a sudden you now build something that a huge check for the population, you say, yeah, we don't care about you.
Well, this makes me wonder if we get down to a point where, because of the hardware system being fragmented, amongst let's call it three major players, right? Microsoft, Google, and Apple, between Windows, the Apple series of OSs, and then you've got Android from Google on the mobile device side of things. It's taken a while, even for those three heavyweights who are also browser manufacturers, to come to agreement on even a standard like WebAuthn, and the FIDO Alliance getting involved with that and really making progress. But that took time. I wonder if we get to the point where it becomes, oh yeah, you can be verified, but it's like the blue chat, green chat, where it only works on iPhone, or it only works on Android, or like Windows Hello only works on Windows, right? Those sorts of things. If we are we destined to basically repeat history and have this fragmentation, or do you think that there's hope that we can maybe solve for this ahead of time through more neutral bodies, or through third parties that are sort of acting as the bridge across devices?
Yeah, so I think I would love to say that this is a linear progression towards an objective end goal, right? Like, yeah, we see the advances. We see the advances with the mobile manufacturers. We see how they're cooperating and things like that. And we're working towards something, and we're going to get there if we keep going down this path. I don't have any faith that that will actually happen. What I do think is actually going to happen is there's 50 different ways people are trying to solve this, and they're all, trying to solve it sort of in adjacencies, but with some unique differences or whatever. But at the end of the day, there's one thing that has to happen and one thing that I think will happen. One thing that has to happen is this will require investment from actors that are not incentivized by profit and not incentivized by business.
Does that exist?
So we've seen, so if you think about it from that perspective, right, there's a reason why what Singapore did has worked really well, because they looked at it and said, we're looking at it as something that gives benefit to citizens, right? And so there's a government requirement or government mandate that came in saying, this is helpful, this will unlock a bunch of other things, so it's worth for us to make the investment. We've seen this happen in Canada. If you've talked to Joni Brennan, who heads DIAC, she's much better than me at explaining this and how she's been able to wrangle the cats and get things working through a public-private partnership and getting people on board with the idea. But it takes, to your point, it takes a lot of time. But without that kind of driver, it's not going to happen. So that's a key piece, right? So we see in the US, for example, Better Identity Coalition is trying to push for digital identity bills. It's trying to push for government to become an attribute provider, an issuer of verifiable credentials and things like that. That will have downstream benefits in our organization. We see in Africa, for example, a bunch of governments are heavily investing in digital identity initiatives because they see that this is a way of really unlocking the potential of their citizenry. So that's the thing that has to happen for us to in any way, shape, or form get somewhere. The flip side of that is the thing that, like I said, will likely happen is there's going to be something that comes out of nowhere that we don't predict, that the common term would be killer app or something like that. Something will happen that we can't really see, but that will unlock sort of a methodology or a modality or something where all of a sudden it was like, hey, let's jump on that. And that'll be the thing that unlocks everybody else's ability to say, oh, I can use that, I can use that, I can use that. And that's going to happen, right? We've seen that to a certain extent with how when Apple and Android started working with the secure enclave and biometrics on the device, and how all of a sudden that has unlocked a lot of potential around how authentication and MFA happens and things like that. Those things will, I think, show up and create, there'll be unexpected sources of advancement, but that when they show up, we'll be like, well, that was totally logical, but we can't see it right now. I'm sure something like that will happen.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what that killer app will be, because I feel like this is not a technology problem per se. It is a mindset problem, because I think if anything that the pandemic has taught us is half the population will will make the societal choice and others may not, for various reasons, whatever it may be, right? What is the killer app that brings everybody to the table? I just moved and had to go in. I spent a day getting driver's license and license plates and things like that. And that was a pain in the butt. Like, this is all stuff I should be able to do online, make it easy, right? Things like that. And maybe that's it. Maybe it's, easy access to government services, to pay your taxes, get your IDs, change your names, right? All the things that you kind of take for granted. They're like, what do you mean? This is your 2022. What do you mean I can't do it online? What do you mean I have to make an appointment for 3 months out? Not saying that this didn't happen to me, and then show up and then wait another 2 hours after my appointment to actually get in for my scheduled appointment. Like, it seems, weird to me that we still haven't sort of solved this identity at a macro level of making it easier for the population. And I feel like it's not necessarily a technology thing at this point. We have the tools. I'm wondering, what is that killer app that will pull everyone to the table and say, oh yes, we are willing to either invest in this in some way, whether it's investment financially or investment in, the privacy components that might go into either managing that or giving up some level of privacy to be able to take advantage of things like that. It makes me wonder, when will that happen? I don't know if we have an answer, but it gets me thinking about that.
I most definitely do not have an answer, because honestly, it is one of those things where you catch me on the wrong day and I'll be like, listen, I've been dealing with this for the last 3 months. I know exactly what's going on. This is never going to happen. I know the people involved. This is never going to happen. They will kill this. But then there's other days where I'm like, oh, I see people who want to, and they're willing to make the investment. And you're right. It's not a technology problem. Honestly, and we talk about this in IAM all the time, right? Like, it's not about technology, it's about process, and it's about people. It's actually more than that, right? This is not even just about process and people. It's about legacy debt or tech debt, and the fact that, yeah, we have the technology, but shifting what you have today to the new technology is just way too complicated because nobody figures out how to do a migration correctly. That's not something people invest in. It's political. It's highly sensitive and personal. Like, that's one of the things that, both frustrates but also attracts me to this identity thing that we work in, which is, it's not a pure tech problem, right? It's not just throw a bunch of cryptography at it, or just build a service and it's fine. I just need to figure out how to do high availability or something like that, and configure my network nodes. This is about people, and people by definition become nebulous and problematic to figure out because you can't do it one way for across everybody. Everybody's unique, and so you end up with this really challenging, in many times philosophical issue, but usually, like I said, it's political, it's financial, it's just problematic that way.
Yeah, the experience that I went through recently was I was going for a mortgage and had to go and get some transcripts from the IRS. So I was forced to go through the ID.me process. And it seemed like the ultimate example of a frictioned user experience, right? We're all shooting for this frictionless user experience. There's a ton of friction to get that verified identity. Now, and if it wasn't that I needed those transcripts so badly, I would have abandoned the process, right? But there was enough value there that I was willing to go through it. So to kind of go back to that killer app, to me, what I was thinking was, now that I've gone through this, now that the IRS has my identity verified, boy, it would be great if I could use that verified identity elsewhere for other government services, or be even better if I could somehow stick it in a wallet on my phone and use it to authenticate for high risk transactions, and never have to go through this again, or not have to go through this again for a long time. So to me, it was killer app being that I go through it one time because I have to, but then I get to leverage it for much more. What are your thoughts on that?
So it is precisely what a bunch of organizations thought would happen, right? Which is, we just need that one place where there is enough of an incentive for people to go through a very heavy friction process to bootstrap their sort of verified identity system. And now you can take that verified identity and use it everywhere else, right? That's the nirvana, right? If you will. And then that doesn't fall apart on technical reason. It falls apart on, like I said, political policy controls, like who else has access to it? Where I'm using it somewhere else. But why are you using it somewhere else? What if I don't want those? I don't like we saw with the backlash that happened to ID.me. A huge part of it was this is a private entity. Yes, it's for IRS, but it's a private entity. They now have a huge stranglehold on something that's very valuable, and they can do things like I can look across services. I can see what all you're doing. These are political issues that prevent stuff like this, and that's the reason why folks have been trying to do verifiable credentials and do something where it sort of disambiguates or disintermediates the whole process. So you can set up a service where they will verify your identity, but then they can issue you credentials, and you can take those credentials with you and use them without having the authority knowing that you're using it. And the service provider has a way of using your verifiable credential to. It's verifiable because they're getting the credential, they're getting the attestations that are in that credential and saying, well, I can verify this credential, but I don't have to actually go back to somebody, or I have a way of doing it without requiring the dots getting connected. The dots getting connected piece is a huge blocker in a whole bunch of initiatives that show up. And that's the flip side of it, right? I used the Singapore example for a couple of times. But the flip side of the Singapore example is also an example of the kind of idea that would never work here because it is highly centralized. And it is all the dots are connected and somebody has complete visibility on your whole life. And, that would never work here. That's the reason why we don't have a single federal identity, federal national ID, and all that sort of stuff. So, like I said, it's not that it's like you said, Jeff, right? This is not that it's a technology issue. The technology to do many different things exists. It's about, can you do it in a way that satisfies the needs of the various constituents, including the citizen, including the human being that is part of this process.
It sounds to me like what you're proposing is sort of like this set of different attributes, and they're kind of chained together. And then, maybe they're like different shapes, maybe just like blocks or something like that. And then, you somehow leverage, this thing, I don't know, I'll call it blockchain, for lack of a better term.
Okay. I got to drop off then. I can't be part of this.
Great job, Jeff.
Let's shift gears a little bit because I want to make sure we respect Nishant's time. A few weeks ago, actually probably a couple of months ago at this point, we asked a bunch of Identirati folks out there what the difference was between digital identity and identity and access management. And we had a show, and I think we played like 5 or 6 different responses that we got. Everyone answered it differently. And what I want to do now is I'm going to ask you, Nishant, the same question here. But before I want to get that, our friend Alec Fry, Fry Identity, for those who are in the know, also responded to it a little bit late, but I promised we would get it in. So I'm going to play it now. It's about 3 or 4 minutes, sort of his explanation of what he thinks the difference is between digital identity. And he has some good analogies in there. And then what we'll do is we'll just kind of talk about it real quick. So let me play that now.
G'day, gents. For Identity here. I'm so excited to say that I have the answer. I have the solution to the major question of IAM versus digital identity. At first, when I recorded something, it was a lot like what you guys said late in the conversation in session 151, where if you asked what your practice does, earlier you used to say that you do IAM, and recently you would say you do digital identity. And the reason why I think that during the responses from different people, where digital identity fits kept flipping from being the umbrella layer above IAM and then later on being the lower component underneath IAM. I think the major reason for that is because if I ask you, what does the word football mean? You might tell me it means a sport of 2 teams of people running around on a field trying to score goals against each other. Or you might tell me it's a little leather ball that's used in that sport on the field. And I think digital identity is exactly that. So earlier on, identity and access management in the early days meant, as someone pointed out, user account management. So it meant giving users access to systems, basically getting their identity, validating it with a password, or now with MFA or passwordless even, and then allowing them access to certain systems. IAM kind of became the umbrella term for things that also included IGA. So technically, IAM is the access and the authentication, and IGA is the governance of the user profiles and everything else. But arguably, IAM was kind of used as an umbrella term above that anyway. So the interesting thing is, as you said as well, that with SIAM now, IAM is sometimes got an invisible W for workforce in front of it. So again, there's not really a newer umbrella term to sit over workforce IAM and SIAM. Then, as we said, there's also IGA and other areas. And then, as pointed out by Sarah as well, ID proofing. So a whole verification of physical documents to a user's online digital representation. Now, interestingly as well, as I think Jim said, that when you log into a certain environment, whether it's Apple or an online store that you deal with, they have a digital identity representation of you. Similarly, as you said, in the Internet of Things, devices each have its own digital identity. So I think the challenge here of getting the terminology sort of sorted out or agreed upon, I think, as you said, the real challenge is the context in which the person you're talking to is referring to this whole space, where the umbrella, which arguably for now, let's say, doesn't have a proper title, includes IAM and SIAM and workforce IAM and IGA and authentication of, identity proofing and assurance and all those other factors, including things like privacy and other areas that fit in that space as well, and even risk and fraud detection, everything that fits in what's needed to manage user access and, identifying the correct person, making sure the right access to the right systems at the right time in the right context, and everything that we've sort of come to phrase a lot around this whole space. But I think the biggest challenge is that in the last however many years, now that we're looking at that record that is stored in systems of a user and their habits and their system access, that's a digital identity. And for lack of a better umbrella term, I think IAM and sort of more recently digital identity is being used as the umbrella term as well, because we don't have a great umbrella term for it. So there you go. I think at the end of the day, football is the whole answer to the question of what's the difference between IAM and digital identity. Hope that was helpful. Thanks. Bye.
All right. So that was from Alec Fry. I think he brings up a few different points. For what I'm hearing is he agrees with sort of my assessment, is that context matters, who you're talking to, how you're using it, the words, I guess, and that it can kind of morph around. Anything in there kind of jog maybe a difference of opinion, or maybe you want to add on to that, Nishant?
So I hate this question just because it's one of those where you will never get a good answer, because everybody comes at it slightly differently. And I'm sure you've seen that with all the responses you got from everybody else. But, and I can just hear Steve Wilson yelling at me, no, that we should just ban the word identity. Identity doesn't exist. Everything is about data. Everything is about, call it what it is, rather than trying to figure out something. But at the end of the day, I think, so I understand all of these perspectives, because at the end of the day, there is no right answer. It's more about what is it that we're trying to solve. Like I come at everything from a use case problem and also an architecture background. So I think about everything like an architect. And to me, IAM is simple in terms of a definition, and can get very complicated very quickly, but it's simple. It's about the tools, the technologies, the methodologies, the processes around managing identities. The word management is right in there, right? It's about managing identities. Well, what is an identity? That's what the word digital identity, when somebody says, what is a digital identity? Well, you're managing the digital identity, but what is the digital identity is so nebulous and so directly tied to who's using it, not who has it. It's not about the individual, but who's using it. And what that sort of consuming entity, the business, the service, whatever it needs, it defines what it considers an identity. And when it defines what it considers an identity, you then pick what are the IAM components, tools, technologies, etc., that you need in order to satisfy that requirement. So, for example, it's interesting because obviously I come from an identity management background where I was doing what is called enterprise identity, which is workforce identity, et cetera, et cetera. But I do not consider IAM to be the silent W, right? For me, IAM is encompassing because I very much deal with IAM even in the consumer space, because the consumer space requires IAM methodologies, whether it's onboarding, proofing, which is essentially what in the enterprise identity world we would have called account registration, user registration. It's the equivalent thing, but they're doing it from a different place, different requirements, different needs. Do you need IGA in consumer identity? Not necessarily, but you do need proofing. You do need a lot of times people don't think about authorization. The vast majority of consumer IAM deployments don't care about authorization because every user is a customer and they're all kind of the same. But then you go to in other scenarios, oh, well, the end user logged in and I want them to have certain OAuth scopes based on who they are, or certain rules that allow them to do what they can do, allow them to access certain features that I deploy for them. So now you've got authorization in the space. So digital identity itself is nebulous and very much defined by who's using it. And because it is defined by who's using it, that dictates what that consuming entity service, etc., will call IAM. But at the end of the day, I am just on the ID Pro body of knowledge. There are lots of definitions there. I don't necessarily agree with all of them, but at least with stuff like IAM, etc., it tries to get to that point, which is IAM is a much simpler definition because it's mostly focusing on the tools and technologies and processes. And digital identity is in the eye of the beholder, so that's nebulous, and they're connected, right? They're orthogonal, but they're connected, so you can't separate the two. So it's not about umbrella or anything. I've introduced a new dimension, right? They're orthogonal to each other and related, right?
Well, you bring up the different definitions, even like within ID Pro, right, which is made up of a whole bunch of identity people, and I think there's value in that because it's offering different perspectives. And yeah, I don't think we'll ever come. I don't know if we'll come to an agreement on the definition itself, but I think at least understanding the different viewpoints and the context that people might be approaching it from is helpful in the design, the thinking, of both the architecture, business processes, et cetera, things like that. That was, I think, one of the things I took away in our original episode we did on this was Adam Michael. He was the only one of the folks that we had kind of played. He's from Texas A&M, and he's in the business, meaning he's not a identity vendor. He's not an identity consultant. He's running identity for a very large organization. So his viewpoint on what is different between the two was completely different than everyone else. Not that it wasn't more or less valid. It was just a different viewpoint. And you're basically looking at the problem and looking at the space, and all the answers are probably right to some degree based on the context you're looking at it.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've encountered this. Like there's a bunch of stuff that we do in identity that we get pulled into that from the business doesn't even consider it or think about it as identity. They're like, why are you guys here? Right? This is not identity. You think this is my, KYC project. This is my fraud. This is my fraud system. Why is the identity folks here? And we're like, well, because we're feeding you the data that is helping you drive your fraud and risk decisions. And so you need to tell us what you care about, and so that we can build that into the identity system, et cetera, et cetera. So most of the time, the businesses don't even think of this as identity. For them, it's their core business.
Well, identity is at the center. Jim, what do you think about what Alex said?
I think his definition is as good as any that I've heard, because I think it's kind of a nebulous answer. But here's what I'm going to bring new to the conversation. So I had this thought recently, which is that when we went from calling it IAM to some people are now calling it digital identity, we don't know if that's going to catch on, and everybody's just going to call this space digital identity and not identity and access management in a year, or in 5 years, or anytime down the road. But it brought me back to the term IGA. The term IGA didn't exist, whatever it was, 10, 15 years ago. It was called identity management, right? And then something happened to those platforms that someone said, these are not like the old identity management platforms. Now they're doing governance, right? They're a full circle picture of the identity lifecycle. And now we're going to call it identity governance and administration, or I think it was identity administration and governance at first, but that kind of the same thing, right? So actually
Oh.
something changed to go from one, identity management, which was, Oracle, CA, Sun, and then SailPoint and Avexa came out and like created this new space, and all those other tools that went out and acquired governance solutions bolted them onto their traditional identity management system and said, hey, we've got IGA2, and everything kind of fell into the bucket. But the ones that were truly IGA systems, they're the ones that survived and kind of made it. All
That
right.
hurts. That hurts so much.
I know
I was
because
there,
you
man.
wrote
I was there.
you wrote Thor, but then it got bought by Oracle, right?
Yeah.
And
But that's the thing, right? It's like we had a identity management platform which was focused on provisioning, and to meet the business requirements, we built in capabilities for access certification or recertification, right? And it was just part of our identity management solution, right? And we had it, and then Waveset had it, and then we all got fought in, and so Sun had it, and then Oracle had it, and then you had the newer folks sort of show up saying, well, we're going to focus on that one feature. But saying you can't raise money and you can't sell a product saying what you're selling is a feature. So they built it better, but it was essentially if you think about it, it's a supercharged version of what all of these products had, where we were selling it as a feature. They came along and said, no, it's its own thing. And the term identity governance was born out of marketing, is my cynical take.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
It was a masterful marketing. Look, it was a masterful marketing move. I wish I had thought of it, but at the end of the day, why did that happen? Besides the money part of it, is because of the fact, going back to this, definitions are nebulous, and we all keep not working on. We don't work off a single lexicon. We don't have a single unified terminology that we all agreed on. So it gives you the opportunity to come in and say, I'm going to create a new thing. So yeah, we're talking about verified identities, and somebody else will come in and say, well, yeah, that thing is verified identities. Here's this new thing, and it's going to be called something else. And people will be like, oh, that's its own thing. When it's not, it may just be the same thing in different colored clothing. But you get enough mind share, and all of a sudden it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I've seen this, and again, I'm not in any way, shape or form trying to denigrate that. It's just the reality of the space we live in, which is, as things evolve, people look for ways to stand out and differentiate. It's just the nature of being in product and business and analyst worlds, right? Analysts want to also come up with say that we understood, and this is a new thing that is emerging because you need to pay attention to. So there's forces at work that happen in this context that aren't really driven by, again, like I said, not everything is linear. Things just happen sometimes.
You can only get these hot takes on the Identity at the Center podcast.
Exactly. It's all marketing for sure. So, there are tastemakers that are in the space, right? The big analyst firms, and they come up with these things to call similar products. And it's whether it's IGA or privileged access management or identity threat detection and response or zero trust. The concepts that make those things up are not new. It's just a repackaged, maybe it's better refined message. Maybe it is a collection of additional tools that maybe weren't quite along as they were maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But a lot of this stuff I feel like it does come down to marketing. And yeah, it's how do you get that in front of the potential buyer? Well, you got to have something that's snazzy and new. You can't go off and, to your point, Nishant, say, well, we have a whole bunch of features, right? I think that's sort of Windows thinking in the early 90s versus Apple and telling a message and telling a story. You wanted an iPhone. You didn't need an iPhone. And I think that was part of the message. And I think that's where we saw some of those up and comers kind of hit at the right time and say, okay, well, we've got this kind of legacy behemoth. This web thing seems interesting. Maybe there's something there. I don't know. Right. And, they rode that wave, and, they've been very successful with it. And there will be another thing that comes along that maybe is another killer app in the identity space to kind of circle back for forward. But I think that's, it's almost like, WebAuthn. No one's going to really know what WebAuthn is. What they're going to know is, oh, passkeys. I heard that from Apple, Windows, Google, and sort of having this marketing term associated with a very technical term that the FIDO Alliance came up with to kind of call it this multi thing, which makes a lot of sense to identity nerds like us. No one else is going to know it that way. They're going to know it as passkeys. And I think that's good to some degree. But when we have this nebulous language and we have, loose interpretations of what some of these things mean, that's where we get into trouble. And that's generally where I get concerned. I see things, everything is zero trust now. There's a zero trust IGA. What does that even mean? Right? Like it's just you're writing marketing at that point because you're hoping for, I don't know, SEO, search engine optimization, more hits in your website. I don't know what it is, but it's a component of it. But to say that you are the zero trust solution doesn't make any sense in that context.
Listen, there's a lot of money that gets raised. There's a lot of sales that get made. There's a lot of, sales that get closed and doors that get opened when you have the right buzzwords. It's just the reality of the world. I'm not going to get bitter about that. It's true. Like we deal with perception. We're dealing with humanity, and people, as you said, they want stories. And it sounds a lot better to spend money on something when somebody's telling you it's a product, not a feature. And then you're willing to spend that kind of money on it. These are real things. And, it unlocks things as well, right? I think there's a lot of things that would never have advanced if they had stayed in the feature space. They needed to come out of that, right? So we can agree to disagree on specific examples, but in general, I try not to be a stickler for terminology or things like that, except when it causes breakdown in communication, which happens fairly often in our space as well. But I try not to be a stickler for terminology, because I try to say, okay, what is it you really want? Tell me exactly what you're looking for. Tell me your use case. Explain to me what you're trying to figure out, and let's figure out what you need for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I need help with IAM. Okay, what part of IAM? All right, we've gone a little bit long, but I want to end with something on a lighter note, something stupid.
Yeah, lighter than that?
Later than that, for sure. All right, here's what I've come up with for this week. And Nishant, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Jim. Nishant, if you could replace all the grass in the world with something else, what would you replace it with? No more grass. You can replace it with any other type of surface that you would like.
Hypoallergenic grass that doesn't require watering.
So I want like AstroTurf, basically, something like that.
No, but AstroTurf is not grass, man. Come on. But we have hypoallergenic dogs, right? So it's like, why can't you create grass that's hypoallergenic? I don't know. It feels like it's something that should be able to be done.
It never has to be cut. Never gets weeds. Just always.
Okay, now you're making it AstroTurf.
It's like a putting green.
No, it should grow. It should be allowed to go wild. But, so it's funny, right? AstroTurf, and we talk about because I talked about football, and I keep thinking about this. Like, natural is good because I don't want to lose the natural world. I don't, this could be a topic for a whole other discussion about metaverse and stuff like that. But I don't want to lose the connection with reality and the real world and natural, right? So, I don't like when grass causes me to, have allergic reactions to it and everything. But I like the fact that there is natural grass all over the place. That is something that has existed for a long time.
Jim, what about you? Better. Jim, what would you replace grass with?
So have you ever heard of kudzu?
It sounds familiar. Refresh my memory.
So you're in North Carolina now. So the idea with kudzu was that it was this plant that could be grown. It takes very little resources and it just goes crazy. And it could be harvested and turned into fuel. So anyway, the problem was it became an invasive species and went absolutely bonkers, and it's not a good idea. So I think the whole question, we could come up with an answer and say, I'd rather have this plant, and that might cause other downstream problems. So I'm just putting that out there. I definitely wouldn't use kudzu as a replacement for grass. What I was going to say is candy. This is like, we really can't do this. Isn't like a question based in reality. Why should my answer be based in reality?
No, that's a good point. So what candy?
I'm in like the mood for something like very sugary, so I'm thinking Smarties. Just like little Smarties that would grow, and you can just pick them off and eat them whenever you want.
Okay, so then at some point in Jim's world, someone will have to go out and buy. Oh, I got to go get some more Smarties boots. It's very deep with Smarties outside. Got to get the Smarties shovel, right? Stuff like that.
It's just like you fling them on somebody, they open their mouth and just try and catch them in their mouth. Yeah,
Exactly.
why
And
not?
then a side of insulin for everybody as well to go along with that.
Yeah, we're living in this fantasy world where we're basically it's Candyland. We're living in Candyland, and no one's diabetic in Candyland.
I like it. This sounds like a very happy world. I'm gonna go high fantasy and just not even thinking it very. I didn't think it very through or thoroughly. Solar panels, being able to capture that much energy and have it be able to turn back into something back into the grid, I think would be super cool. I think would be very hot, a lot of services, and we would be walking on glass quite a bit, or maybe thin layers of plastic or whatever it may be. But yeah, in my world, we don't pay for energy. It just happens.
Yeah, in colleges, usually they have signs like "Stay off the grass," right? Like stay on the sidewalk. If you put solar panels there, you wouldn't have to put those signs up anymore. You'd save so much money in signs.
Well, they'd be blocking, the energy production. It'd be like, stay off the solar panel.
Yeah. Well, in my college dorm, we had a sign that said "Keep off the grass" because we thought it was funny that grass is also like the 70s era term for something else.
Yeah, yes, we know what you're referring to. We'll call him Jim. Get off my lawn, McDonald. At this point,
There you go.
all right, let's go ahead. We've successfully gotten super dumb with it here in the last couple of minutes, but Nishant, really appreciate your time and joining us for this week. So far, it seems like the Courtyard Marriott Wi-Fi gods have held with us, so hopefully this turns out to be a good recording. I'm sure it was. Conversation was excellent. Anything you want to wrap up with, Nishant, before we let you go?
No, I think it was an interesting conversation that kind of reflects the vastness, broadness, and nebulousness of what we do. So I think I'll sort of end with saying, hey, everybody go sign up for ID Pro.
Good one. I like that one
Become
too.
an ID Pro member. Bring these conversations into the Slack channel. We need more of these.
The Slack channel is definitely worth the money. All three of us are ID Pro members. The Slack channel, I'm more of a lurker there, but I can go there and post something. The couple of them I have, and I get like an answer back in like 30 minutes. It's crazy. So totally worth it just for that.
Yeah.
Jim, how about yourself? Final thoughts for this week?
I can't top what Nishant just said, but definitely open to networking. Please connect to me on LinkedIn. Connect to all of us on LinkedIn. I hope to have a chance to connect with as many people as possible. And it really helped when we were at the Gartner conference, because with the show and kind of all the new connections that we've made, I got to kind of meet so many folks in person. It was really great. I really feel like we're kind of building a community with the podcast.
Yeah, it is very cool. Very happy with being able to even do like that show that we did with, listeners that we hadn't met before. And I was like, hey, let's sit down and just talk identity. And we turned it into, I think, like an hour episode, and we had a good old time doing it. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that we're into. And definitely we'll have links to all of our LinkedIns, Nishant's, Jim's, myself in the show notes. I have a link to Uniken, so you can check out what Nishant's been working on, as well as don't forget to support Jim with his webinar later this week. And hopefully we'll see people at Authenticate, maybe at Octane. And we're on the web, idacpodcast.com. We're at Twitter, IDAC Podcasts. And we're enough with all that promotion. We'll let everyone go and call it for this week. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one. Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.